and Marco.
Okay, good.
So should we, maybe when we are chatting, we can just introduce them or something?
I think we should. I think we should certainly mention them, and then maybe they could come in at the end. If there's Q&A, or we could think of a question, maybe a question for Pilar about how she responded to the stories and her working method, something like that would be quite nice.
We're just now streaming live on YouTube.
Oh,
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Has it just gone live? Is it?
About 8 o'clock, yeah, so it's just automatically started streaming.
Okay, so hello on YouTube, everybody. Okay, no one has seen that yet because I've only just put it on the website, so that's it now. Visible. Okay, so behave yourselves now from now on, folks. You're now being broadcast around the world. If anyone gets bored hearing about Donald Trump, they'll find us.
Trump.
And that's the last time I'll mention that. Don't worry. I don't care what's happening in the news at the moment. Sorry for all the bings. That's all the people in the waiting room.
Yeah, there's a nice crowd gathering.
There is.
Really
Just to let you know, we got 49 tickets.
Woohoo!
Oh, hang on.
There's actually 5 of them in the waiting room, so still a few more to come.
Well, what we can do, let me just get these last 2 people in who've bought tickets, or 3 people. Oh, it's 52 people then.
Good.
That's pretty good. Well done, folks. You've attracted an audience.
Yeah.
Or you've got lots of friends. I'm not sure which. Okay. I better watch what I say.
Yeah,
Sorry
I
about the things. Yeah.
think they have more friends than the space scientists have, haven't they? Is that right?
The space scientists. Yeah. No, yes. The biologists are more friendly than the space scientists.
That's all, isn't it?
Is that right, Pippa?
Oh.
Biologist versus.
Exactly. A punch up.
That's a cat amongst the pigeons, that
Yeah.
Yeah. Or at least five-a-side football or something. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, I think that's all the technology in place doing what it's supposed to be doing. Now I'm recording to the Zoom, which gets the best recording I can play with. Okay. Right. Is everybody set, ready to rock and roll?
Mm-hmm. So do we open the floodgates? Who's ready?
So if you can turn off your microphones, folks. And Mark, do you want to let people in?
I'll let people. I'm just going to hide.
Oh, Mark's disappeared. Okay. Hello. Yes, we're coming along. Good. Wow, what a turnout. Okay. Hello, everybody. Come on in. Come on in. Come on in. Can you all hear me okay? Just nod furiously if you can hear me.
Hello.
Yes, look in the back of the car. Just bear with it a few seconds while I let people in. There's a good crowd in the waiting room. Okay. I think can you make sure your microphone's turned off as you come in? I don't mean to be rude, but there's a lot of people here. And I don't want feedback destroying delicate ears. Is that everybody in, Mark? Yeah.
That's everybody I've got here. They all seem to be in now. So
Okay, brilliant. What a turnout. It's fantastic. And a good night for it. So we're not going to mention the T word at all for the next hour or so. If anyone does, there's a tea jar to put your money in. You have to buy lots of books from the website. Yeah, so welcome to this. This is the launch of Biopolis, Tales of Urban Biology, published this month. Fantastic. My name's Noel Chidwick. I'm the editor-in-chief and one of the co-founders of Shoreline of Infinity. Mark Toner is my other co-founder, and he's behind the scenes looking after the technology. So I'm the editor of Shoreline of Infinity, and it's for those who don't know, it's a science fiction magazine. We do events and we publish books, Biopolis being one of them. And what we're going to do this evening, we've got a great lineup of a good number of the authors in that collection of stories, and then a scientist or two as well. I'm going to get short readings from them. We're going to have a little chat with the editors about the book and how it came about. And at the end, if you've got any questions, by all means, we'll hopefully have time for some questions. And the questions, you can either put them in the chat and I'll read them out, or if you're brave enough, make a gesture somewhere and you can come online and speak your question live to the group of writers here who'll be reading tonight. A little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this for future reference and for putting on the website. And also we're going out live on YouTube at the moment. So you're all looking great, so don't be frightened. You're looking very good actually tonight. It's one of the best looking audiences I've seen for a while. Fantastic. So if you're not sure, if you don't want to be seen on YouTube, just make sure your video's switched off if you're feeling a little bit nervous about that, or you want to go and blow your nose and not be seen in public. Okay, that's it. One more to come. My voice, I've had long COVID, so my voice is really drying madly at the moment. So bear with me. Yeah, so Biopolis, Tales of... You can't see that there. Right, whose idea was to do a green cover for a book with a green screen? Anyway, Biopolis, Tales of Urban Biology, edited by Larissa Schetz, Jane McKee and Elise Kashar from Edinburgh University. It's a lovely collection of stories around urban biology, using biology in the future and different areas. And as it says on the back cover, these tales present deeply human accounts of bio-based futures, illuminating the relevance of research in synthetic biology, biochemistry, bioengineering, computational biology and biomedicine to our collective goals. And each writer has worked with a scientist to come up with an idea and a story.
It's got a green cover, so it's just...
I know, it's annoying, isn't it? I tell you what really bugged me, got onto Zoom, and the last book we'd done was Shoreline. Thank you, Elise. That's another one. Shoreline Infinity number 18, the last book. Look at that. Green blooming cover as well. So just right for the Zoom time. So yeah. Yes, Elise is showing the picture of the book, and that's what we're going to be reading from tonight. So let's start with our first reader, and that reader is Gavin Ingalls. Now, Gavin writes for games and interactive media, from the fitness app Zombies Run to Call of Cthulhu and the upcoming Rivers of London RPG. He recently won the Nesta Alter Narratives, which I think is a great title, Nesta Alter Narratives competition to reimagine short-form storytelling for teenagers. His project, The Reader Remix, provides DJ decks to construct your own soundtrack as you listen to the story. I had great fun this afternoon playing with that, so I really enjoyed that. And that's on www.readermix.com. So Gavin, want to take it away, please?
Thank you. I must say readerremix.com. If you go to readermix.com, I couldn't promise there's not a porn site there. So readerremix.com.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm Gavin Ingalls. I worked with Dr. Linus Schumacher, whose research interests include data-driven modelling of immune cell interactions in tissue regeneration and repair. And this is a wee extract of the story that resulted. Before emerging, Jared performed his secret transformation, the one he used every day to get around. He took his distinctive spray of hair and mussed it down over his eyes. He added a hunch to his shoulders and a slight lurch to his gait. Then he turned into the street and walked 4 blocks without anybody paying him the slightest attention. He could afford a chauffeur, of course, but comedy needed raw material, and that's what he got from the streets. Empathic buskers were the new thing. These villains had enhanced their perception to the point where one good look at you was enough to know what music would spear you through the heart, would root you there and open your wallet. Jared spied a girl with a violin swaying dark-eyed behind a jungle of blonde hair. He kept his eyes on the pavement. The scent of fresh bread distracted him. A new baker had replaced Harrigan's, one of the hip-tech indies which had pricing tiers linked to the level of simulation. They modelled microclimate, temperature gradients, need geometry, rehydration, and 100 other variables. For the price of a beer, you could have a superior loaf. For the price of a good shirt, you could have an elite. He'd heard about another bakery in the West End whose top-tier loaf cost as much as a car. Supposedly a sophisticated palate could tell the difference. Definitely an enhanced one could. Jared couldn't believe it was worth the outlay. Perhaps he could get this stuff into the show later. Close to the studio, he saw two guys not fighting over a parking space. He had to swallow a laugh. These pinheads dropped money on combat enhancements, imagining themselves ruling the streets. What actually happened was that each simulation recognized the other, ran a matrix of outcomes, and informed the combatants of the likely indecisive result and its accompanying injuries. Marketing compared it to the samurai battles of old, where the entire confrontation was played out in a stare and one man walked away in defeat without either sword leaving its scabbard. The reality was more like two dogs yapping at each other from the limit of their leashes. Jared swirled all this stuff around in his head. He'd usually have a draft script by this point of the walk, trying out various word orders to make the punchlines land harder. Something about empathic bakers, perhaps, making loaves you had to fall in love with, or buskers in combat. But it wasn't coming easily. His head was fuzzy. There was no other way to put it. It had been like that yesterday too, but it was worse today.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. That was excellent. Yay, round of applause for Gavin. Hey, clap, clap, clap. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Thanks, Gav. This is Pippa Goldschmidt. Now, Pippa is a writer based in Edinburgh and Frankfurt. She's like Schrodinger's writer, I suppose. She has a PhD in astronomy and writes fiction, essays, and creative non-fiction exploring science and scientific practice. She's also the editor, co-editor of an anthology of work inspired by the uncanny called Uncanny Bodies, and recently published by Luna Press. And amazingly enough, she'll be here next week for launching that book, Uncanny Bodies. So, Pippa, what have you got for us from Biopolis? Biopolis.
Hi, Noel. Thanks very much for that introduction. So my scientist that I worked with, I spent a happy morning with her, was Professor Karen Halliday, and she looks at the way that plants respond to light and how they adapt to light and their environments. And I was inspired by that to think about how you can make a computer using plants and what might happen in that sort of society. So I'm going to read out the very beginning of my story that's set in Orkney, and it's called Branching Out. You swoop over St. Magnus in the heart of the city, close enough to see where the surface of the cathedral's tower has worn away in coin-sized pockets and needs repair. You fly above the stones of Stennis, able to identify individual fronds of mustard yellow lichen growing on the rock, an accurate measure of air quality. You travel along the A965 towards Stromness and the new builds, assessing the degree of disturbance to the surrounding moorland. A colleague pops a head around the door. Tea? You nod and return to the footage. You continue to measure, check, process, and compare before you input the data and the related analysis to the vault. Tea arrives and you pause to exchange pleasantries with the rest of the team. It's most important to take regular breaks from this demanding and important work. Someone hands round slices of homemade cake. You finish for the day and head home. I'm heading home when I see the fox trotting purposefully along the street, its nose scenting rubbish, zigzagging back and forth across the pavement, and only slowing down when it reaches the cafe opposite St. Magnus. Just an ordinary fox doing what foxes always do in cities, and at first it doesn't register. But I've never seen a fox here. They don't live on these islands. They never have. How did it get here? By hitching a lift on a boat across the Pentland Firth? The fox pauses in its search for food and looks at me before it jinks off down one of the dark fennels as if it knows exactly where to go. Later, lying in bed, I conjure up all the separate parts of the fox that I can remember. Whiskers, snout, a tail slung low, a walk that can best be described as swaggering. You act as if you own the place. I sit up in the darkness. I haven't heard that voice for a long time. I don't want to hear it ever again.
Thank you, Pippa. Lovely, lovely. Excellent. Those two stories, hopefully, are little extracts of stories to give a little taste of the book. And I must admit, I really enjoyed reading this collection when Jane presented me the idea of publishing the book and told me about it. I thought that's brilliant. So I was very pleased to offer the services of Shoreline to release the book into the wild. So talking of the editors, let's have a wee chat now with them just to sort of get some idea of where it will come about. So who the editors are, to introduce them to you. One of them is Jane McKee, and she has several poetry publications, some resulting from collaborations with artists, which I think is a fascinating way of working, collaborating especially, but with artists too. Morocco Rococo won the Sundial SAC Award for Best First Book of 2007. And her most recent collection is Quiet Woman Stay, published by Cinnamon Press. Jane's currently a senior lecturer in creative writing at Edinburgh University and is a member of Edinburgh-based Shaw Poets and Writers block as well as the 12 Collective of Women Writers. And her co-editor is Larissa Schetz, Dr. Larissa Schetz, and she's also at the University of Edinburgh, and she's a lecturer in design informatics and is a program director of product design with Edinburgh Futures Institute, who, bless them, I think were involved in supporting and sponsoring this book. With a background in interaction design, she has collaborated with biologists, social scientists and several institutions in biodesign related projects, running an interdisciplinary course on biodesign with Naomi Nakayama. So yeah, what a talented pair of people these are. Larissa, are you there? You can see Jane. Larissa, are you with us?
I'm here.
Okay. Okay, so let's get the gallery up. There we go. Yeah, I mean, the first question obviously is, where did the idea of Biopolis come from?
Yeah, I think maybe I can start answering that. So I work in design, and a lot of our work is to think about applications of technology. We received some funding to rethink the future of the city through biodesign. And at the time I was collaborating with Jane in other projects in the Futures Institute. Jane is also a fellow at the Edinburgh Futures Institute. And we basically discussed, I had worked with Elise before as well. And we were discussing talking about how much science fiction has influenced design. And we came up with this idea of having a book with stories about the future of biodesign in the city. And that is how everything started.
Yeah, Jane, have you got anything to add to that?
No, not really. I mean, I think it was initially, it came from Larissa because she was involved with the University of Sydney. So it was like a joint bid. And it revolved around notions of the smart city, I think. And they were planning a series of workshops in Australia. And the book and the collaboration was sort of our part of the project, but we also received some additional funding from the Edinburgh Futures Institute too. So yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So how did it come about then how did you pick your writers and scientists? What was your thinking there?
That was quite tricky. I mean, so I know quite a lot of science fiction writers. There was a little bit of, people I know and my contacts who I thought might respond well to a sort of a collaborative remit. it was people who I knew, who I thought would be good for this particular spec, and who were available and enthusiastic about the project. So you know, it worked out quite nicely actually, and we arrived at 10 writers and slightly more than 10 scientists. So Larissa, do you want to say a little bit about your connection with Elise and then that part of the process?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, I worked with Elise Kasha in other projects and other collaborations, and some of the scientists had been involved in the previous collaborations. Other scientists were interested in joining this project, and that is basically how everything came together. Yeah, the match was random, so we run some numbers to match the writers with the scientists, and thankfully everything worked well.
Right, so you didn't do a character match to find the right scientist, the right writer. You threw them into a bag
We
and
threw them
pulled out.
together. It was just a random reaction.
Yeah.
That's
Why did you choose a random way of doing it rather than trying to balance a writer you thought might work with a particular scientist? Why random?
We didn't really have time for that, so we were on quite a tight time scale. So as all these sort of projects where you have a deadline, we had to get it moving fairly quickly. So but we did a sort of matching event, which I think Elise might say a little bit more about later. So we had a sort of, it wasn't a matching event because we actually sort of decided that we were a little bit wary of that whole, you know, speed dating matchmaking thing. So we did put a little bit of thought into what might work well, but otherwise where we didn't know, we just sort of took a punt. So,
I think it's also that none of us had a complete picture of what it would turn out. So I didn't know all the writers. I think Jane didn't know all the scientists. And it didn't make sense to start a discussion based on assumptions that none of us really knew. So and to be honest, I didn't know all the scientists either. So so we all had a bit of information, and it didn't make sense to start discussing based on this broken piece of data.
Oh, excellent. So what was the main things you got out of doing the project? What was the things afterwards you thought that was really good, that was worth doing because of?
Oh, the book was amazing. The book is amazing. I'm really impressed with all the stories. I was delighted when I started reading all the stories, and I think wow. It's a lot more imaginative than any designer could possibly be. So I'm very glad that we invited all these writers, and the combination was absolutely fantastic.
I would agree. I mean, I think the stories themselves are the best outcome, but I mean, I think, you know, the sort of process itself is interesting. The fact that there's a stimulus to write and that exchange of ideas. So there's definitely something in that. We didn't sort of try and record that in any way, but I mean, just that protest, like that sort of process of how ideas kind of catalyze is interesting in itself as well. So.
And I think it's also like the very mundane aspect of these technologies that come up in these stories that I found particularly fascinating. That it's not just a buzz about the technology, but it's about how that would work in real life. Fantastic.
Yeah, that's where science fiction comes alive, when it's actually being used by real people and realistic circumstances. You can get the feel for how that technology affects people much better that way than simply writing about it. That's always the strength from science fiction for me, I think. And these stories really show that very well, I think. Okay, well, let's move on a little bit then, because Elise maybe talk a little bit more about the interaction between the science and the writer and the scientists, because that's I find that fascinating, getting two brains together from those two sides and see what happens. But before that, let's have another couple of short bits of reading. Who's next up? Oh, Andrew Wilson, Andrew J. Wilson, I beg his pardon. Hope he's ready. I can't see him on the screen, but I'm sure he's around. Andrew, let me introduce you. Andrew J. Wilson's short stories, poems, and non-fiction have been published all over the world, sometimes in the most unlikely places. His story, The Stiltmen of the Lunar Swamps, was described by The Guardian as hilarious, like a crazed collaboration between P.G. Wodehouse and Conan Doyle, and that appears in Shoreline Infinity. We published that in issue 4. Was that right, Andrew? Issue 4?
Yeah.
And we plonked it into the best of chosen of the Golden Age as well, so of the First Age. And you've done other things apart from Right from Shoreline Infinity. You've done a lot more things than that, so you're being very, very modest there. Andrew, tell us a little bit about your story and your tame scientist that you keep under your desk.
Thank you, Noel. Well, my story is called The Negotiators, and I collaborated with Dr. Alessia Lepore, who is a postdoctoral research associate in the Institute of Cell Biology at the University of Edinburgh. And Alessia studies how bacteria repair their DNA after antibiotic treatments. She uses fluorescence microscopy to track the motion of proteins that identify and initiate the DNA repair process in Escherichia coli, if I pronounced that right. And actually, ironically enough, Alessia and I had already met because my wife is the lab manager in Alessia's group, and she'd read Stiltmen as well. So we just fitted like a glove, and she was brilliant. She's a brilliant mind, but every time I came up with some stupid idea, she'd give me real hard science to back it up. So here's the opening of The Negotiators. 5 years ago, Dr. Rebecca Kerr had almost lost her life in deep space. Now she wondered if dying might have been the better career move. Her medical research had reached a dead end. What little funding the group had left was about to run out. The bacteria were still not cooperating. "What do you want?" Rebecca asked. The colony under the fluorescence microscope gave no indication of needing anything. Even though the microbes had been grown in a perfectly nutritious broth, the cells refused to divide. It was almost as if they knew that any increase in their numbers would only lead to trouble. "You know what we want, Rebecca." She looked up from the monitor to find that Professor Gordon Boyle had entered the otherwise deserted laboratory. The head of the department had a face like a bunched fist, and the tone of his voice was just as ominous. "Don't get up," he said. Rebecca ignored Boyle's suggestion, and the servomotors in her exoskeleton hummed in chorus as she rose. He flinched. Despite her atrophied muscles and emaciated frame, the aluminium structure around her intimidated some people. It was like a suit of space-age armor, and the built-in gyroscopes that compensated for her compromised sense of balance gave her movements an eerie grace. "Can I help you, Gordon?" "I need to hear some good news, Rebecca," he said. "I can't throw you a lifeline without one." That's a curious turn of phrase to use, she thought, when you're the one of the sharks circling this project. "What would you say if I reminded you that no news is supposed to be good news, Gordon?" "I would tell you that the road to hell is paved with good inventions," Boyle replied. "Intentions? I beg your pardon." "The road to hell is paved with good intentions, Gordon, but I suppose you might find a few inventions along the way." Boyle glared at her, his annoyance at being corrected and then verbally outflanked boiled over. "I need a progress report for the Oversight Committee," he stuttered. "Now!" "At least give me a day to brainstorm with the rest of the team," Rebecca said. "As you well know, you can't rush good science, and you certainly can't ask an experiment to do what you want, pretty please." "Well, what do you expect me to do then?" Boyle asked. "I expect you to wash your hands on your way out," she replied.
Yay! Round of applause. Brilliant. We're going to have to get that clap sorted out, I think. That's great, Andrew. Thanks very much. As ever, I always love your writing. The second reader in this little chunk is Kirsty Wishart. And her stories have appeared in New Writing Scotland, 404 Inc. magazine, Product, and the Glasgow Review of Books. Her first novel, The Pocketbook Guide to Scottish Superheroes, will be published by Sterling Publishing. Oh, will be. All right, excellent. That is a Christmas present in the making there, I suspect. She's currently working on a book about Scottish psychogeography, so if you've got any suggestions for a good wander, please get in touch with Kirsty. So, Kirsty, where are you? And
Yeah.
if you can tell us a little bit about your story, and your scientists too can come
Yeah,
along.
I was lucky enough to get to work with two scientists. So I got to work with Vivek Saintville and Adam Moll, who's probably here, hopefully here somewhere. Vivek will talk a wee bit about the science, hopefully, after this. But my story is called The Social Life of Cells, and it was written back in April, so you might recognise it's been slightly overtaken by events since then. When the outbreak was over, the lockdown rescinded, Edinburgh experienced levels of festival fever far exceeding those that usually met the beginning of August. Even cynics who made plans to escape the city during the weeks when you couldn't nip out for a sandwich without having to force your way through a Peruvian dance company decided this summer they'd be staying put. When it was announced the first major event would be a revival of the Science Festival, the first festival to be cancelled the previous year, the council was overwhelmed with volunteers. As a mark of respect towards those who had successfully discovered a vaccine for the virus, Edinburgh would become a city of scientists, a place to inspire new leaps in scientific thought. Ambitious science-inspired land art, sculptures and children's play parks and fairground rides would be constructed. The city desperate to have as many opportunities
Kirsty, you muted your... Thank you.
Sorry. Did you hear much of that, or did you hear the beginning of it? When Fraser was given the assignment to meet up on the first day of the festival with a biologist involved in the creation of some of the work on display, he very nearly turned it down. He didn't because the magazine that had asked him, emerging joyfully from the financially enforced slumber of the past few months, was a useful source of work. But one of the unexpected side effects of the slow release from lockdown was the effort it was taking him to adjust to being sociable again. Arts journalism had already occasionally felt an odd choice for an introvert, particularly when he found himself standing in the corner of some arty soiree. Then he'd wished he'd followed his original career choice of becoming a nun, announced age 5 after watching The Sound of Music. Months ago, when one of his regular jobs that involved office work 2 days a week had switched to working from home, all interviews being conducted by Skype or Zoom or even just over the phone, he'd been struck by how much he'd preferred it. Yes, he missed some of his colleagues, the office chat, hearing about the latest documentary discovered on Netflix, but he also secretly revelled in his solitariness. He knew he was being ridiculous, but the thought of having to be in someone's company, their actual physical company, for at the very least an hour, nearly caused him a panic attack. Plus, this was a scientist. There'd be a load of technical jargon he'd have no clue about, his scientific learning having stalled after fainting during the dissection of a bullseye in biology. He knew that was the editor's point, sticking them both together, showing how science should be easily translatable to even a numpty like him. Still, it felt like an interview to be endured rather than enjoyed.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kirsty. We've all endured interviews. Yeah. Okay, that was lovely. So that's 4 little tasters they've had so far to get a feel for this lovely collection of stories. The next section really is there's a third editor involved, Elise Kashar. And Elise, are you there? Yes, you are. Yes.
I am.
And just to introduce Elise, she's a lecturer at the University of Edinburgh, where she teaches synthetic biology in the School of Life Sciences. Her research focuses on engineering cells to perform new functions for various biomedical applications. Elise is also involved in collaborative projects between biologists, engineers, social scientists and artists. And are you being joined by Vivek at the moment? Is that the plan?
Yes, so we decided it would be nice to try to dissect a bit one of the collaboration. And this one, as you said, is slightly different. It's a trio rather than being a pair. So Kirsty was trioed with Vivek and Adam. And so I thought Kirsty would be maybe interesting to first understand what happened. Did you go and visit? I should add that Vivek and Adam both work in the same lab, although they work on different projects. So did you go and visit them?
I did, and yeah, I would just like to say thank you to everyone who did organise this project, because it was fantastic for someone like me who's had no real experience of what the actual life of a scientist is like to go to a lab. And Vivek and Adam were just fantastically generous in the amount of time that they gave and showing me around the lab. And it was something that I was really interested in, just the practicalities of being a scientist, the things that I hadn't really thought about before, but the practical difficulties of booking equipment or using the space, or how much time and effort is put into developing the science that they work on. And so that's why I really wanted to write something that thought more about the actual practical life of being a scientist. And I think sometimes, particularly for the general public, it's something that can seem a bit removed from their own life. And so with my story, I really wanted to bring science sort of into the heart of Edinburgh, and so that everyone could have the opportunity for the sort of collaboration that I was able to have with Vivek and Adam. So yeah, it's been a really great experience, and I hope Vivek got something out of it as well.
So it's really their personality and themselves as scientists, more than really the science itself, that inspired the story?
Yes, I mean, I did have Vivek, as I say, he will hopefully go into more of the actual science that he and Adam work on, but it's largely to do with developing RNA, I think, to work or do the effects that drugs would have in terms of treating certain conditions. So it's very, very specific. And I did ask Adam and Vivek, well, that's fantastic work that you're doing, but how do you see it working in terms of the life of the city? And they kind of said, well, we don't. And I thought, oh, right, great. So what do I do now? But just as I say, the actual experience of meeting them and hearing about their work, I really wanted to get the idea of, well, what's the actual life of a scientist like? You know, the whole thing about the difficulties in perhaps getting funding for certain projects. So you're having to think about, well, how likely is this project to succeed? Which means that you might not be able to concentrate on certain projects that could be even more valuable, but might have a higher chance of failure. So, and also just the time that you have maybe to think about new ideas, new projects is perhaps limited because of that, the practical experience of having to go into the lab and work on what you're working on.
And we were sort of lucky with the timings, because now visiting lab has gotten so much more complicated.
Well, exactly, yes. And I mean, one of the other things that I was really struck by when first meeting Adam and Vivek is that when they were telling me about their work, I immediately started to think about, well, how could their work go wrong? What sort of, you know, they're messing around with RNA and what have you. So, you know, what the kind of Frankenstein-like possibilities of that. And I was struck by how quickly I thought in dystopian terms. And I really wanted to resist that. And I wanted to write something that was really celebratory. That particularly nowadays, you know, we're very, very aware of how important science is. And we're also aware of how a lack of understanding can be incredibly dangerous. So I just blatantly wanted to write something that was celebrating science. And also just as a kind of thank you to Adam and Vivek, because their generosity of time and knowledge, really.
So what about you, Vivek? What did you decide to participate in this project as a scientist?
Well, initially, the main reason, I think me and Adam, if I can speak for Adam as well, the main reason we wanted to participate was mainly curiosity. We just wanted to know what this project is all about and what it's gonna like come out as, because we had no idea like what it's gonna turn out as. But at the back of the mind, there was also this thought that usually like artists are like filled with imaginations, and just by collaborating with them in some work, can we just get some inspiration for some imaginations, which we can then incorporate into our own work. So I think that's what kind of inspired us to like.
So is it what it brought you, this project? Is it what you took from it? What did you learn from it?
Actually, so this project, it kind of gave like a non-scientific perspective of our own work. Like, for example, like both from our interaction with Christy, where we had to like carefully filter out our own description of the project, which allowed us to understand the socially relevant aspect of our own project. But also from her story, that made us think in like new directions, like making like unusual connections between molecular interactions and human interactions, which is made very nicely in the story. So it kind of like allowed us to think, actually, can we extrapolate like the principles, basic principles of social interaction into molecular interactions? Can we actually apply that when we are like designing things? Or the other way around, like, can we understand how human beings behave based on how things work inside a cell? Can these two things, which are at like totally different scale, are they even relatable? Is there any underlying principle or something like that? So it made us think like this, like after this project, and like especially after reading the story and everything. So it was really good. Like, really very happy to have this experience actually.
What about the communication? So I'm just looking more at maybe challenges at this collaboration. I know that sometimes working cross-disciplinary, it's sometimes difficult. We are talking about vocabulary, how to explain things. So both for Kirsty and you, Vivek, did you find challenges in this collaboration?
For me personally, I think it wasn't much about like discussing the concepts. It wasn't that difficult, but initially it was difficult to actually comprehend the whole nature of the Biopolis project, and like especially what it's aspiring to do. Because the whole time, both me and Adam, we were just struggling with this thought that we couldn't contribute to the project more efficiently, and if we could know like what's the end goal, probably we could do much better. So this was, but slowly, like the more we interacted with Christy, I think it just faded away, and we slowly realized, like, because we wanted to know whether it's like a science fiction or whether it's like some like social impact of science or what it is. But slowly we realized that, okay, it's like a hybrid of everything, and of all the interface between science and literature, and it actually turned out to be really good.
What about you, Kirsty?
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, yes, it did make me realise about my kind of lack of scientific knowledge, because there were times when the discussion would get really kind of technical. But then there were moments when Adam told me that if you have cells and they're sort of separated out in a sort of petri dish, they will try and reach each other. They will try and kind of link, or if you have like heart cells, they will have a pulse. And that sort of thing is just an absolute gift for a writer, and that was the fantastic. It was just the amount of material, the amount of stuff to think about. And particularly I'm hearing that about the social life of cells, that kind of interacting at a situation where we're all locked down, and you can feel that urge to kind of get out and connect with people. As I say, it was what was lovely about it was that, yes, you've got these the technical language and what have you, but at the heart of it, there are these metaphors that can be applied everywhere. So it was a real sort of eye-opening experience. It was, as I say, the amount of material that you could get, and the only shame about it was because of lockdown, we weren't able to have that interaction further. But hopefully,
in the future,
yes, that will keep that going. For Biopolis 2, the return.
Yes, the return. So yeah, I think we've been lucky with the timing. We'll also be lucky with the pairings, as Larissa and Jen were explaining. I think my main contribution to the project is that because we didn't have much time to construct the pairing, to get all the scientists and writers to meet around drinks and food. I think that was my best contribution for the project, and I think this really made a really good start, I think, of conversation. I think everybody will agree. What I find amazing is, out of those pairing, if you were to be explained what the science was and what type of writing the writers usually write, you couldn't at all predict what came out as stories. So I really like this sort of emergent process where really what you get at the end is really much more than the sum of its parts. So I thought this was really incredible. Maybe later on in the Q&A, session, some other scientists might want to share, you know, what it brought them. But for now, maybe we can go back to the readings.
Yep. Okay. Oh, thank you very much, Elise. That was great. Lovely insight to how the stories were constructed, and I'd love to hear more about the scientist's contribution to the process, and hearing about Vivek there. Was taking the idea of stories back into his own science, which I'd love to hear more about later. That's one of the questions I like to pursue. But before the Q&A, let's have a last couple of readings to give you more flavour of the book. Our next reader is Neil Williamson. And his books have been shortlisted for British Science Fiction Association, British Fantasy and World Fantasy Awards. He has an engineering background and has retained a keen interest in theoretical solutions to our most urgent problems, and he found Professor Horsfall's work in waste remediation both fascinating and wonderfully inspiring. Okay, Neil, unleash your scientist and tell us about your scientist and give us a little taste of your story.
Okie dokie, thank you, Noel. Yeah, I was actually delighted to be paired with Professor Horsfall. Her work in synthetic biology is a new discipline I didn't know anything about. It was really nice to be able to learn about that. And Kirsty was talking about a gift for a writer, and sometimes a gift for a writer when it comes to something like this is not just the science, but the potential application for the science that you can see it being used in a modern society. And that one for me was the ability to use engineered bacteria to remediate or to reclaim elements and precious materials from inorganic waste. So, you know, things like batteries and that sort of thing. And that got me thinking about a slightly not too far off future, perhaps one that's suffering from environmental decline, perhaps one that's suffering from resource scarcity, in which they have to create a system of living where resources are retained as much as possible and recycled as much as possible. So that was the genesis for my idea of the story. And but that isn't the story itself. The story is really about what happens to the people who are left outside of the system and who have to struggle to get by. So the story is called Mudlarking. And unlike everyone else, I'm going to read a bit from the middle. At the end of the Barton Road, Doug pulls over underneath the westbound Sweetway, dividing the White-Inch marshes from the basin that formed after the Clyde Tunnel flooded. I instruct my own vehicle to stop a few streets short. Watching Doug unload the crawlers from the van and lead them through the gate in the biomesh fence like a pack of hounds eager for the hunt, I commandeer a nearby monitoring drone and send the tiny machine soaring into the sky. The hovering device rotates, orienting itself against the layout of the city as it waits for instructions. The view patch to my phone shows the swollen river teeming down from the east, bullying the supports of the bridges as it flows by. The scant remains of old Govan stand to the south, and beyond, the new ministry habitats. The belligerent river again to the west, slowing and widening, boastful of the chunks it has reclaimed, or it has claimed from Renfrew on one side and Clydebank on the other. And finally, to the north, the fairy tale graveyard of the West End. In the high distance, the gleaming edifice of the Heights dwarfs everything else. It's 2 decades old, but it remains a thing of wonder. Our first attempt at a truly self-contained mass living space. The roof has room for both a solar farm and an agri-block. The basement, a full-scale reclamation centre, scrubbing the air, purifying the water, and turning the building's organic waste into biomass energy, or fertilizer, or feed for the array of clever, tailored bacteria that winkle out treasure from our inorganics. This is the piece of simple genius that makes it all possible. We're a poor country now, but one nevertheless hung up on the old nail of national pride. Everything from base metals to rare earth elements are dwindling resources on a global scale, so rather than pay a premium to China or Australia for them, we remediate them out of our own junk. This treasure goes to the state manufacturers to be used in new generations of British-made devices, and the value of the reclaimed materials is subtracted from the residents' resource debt. Recycling at the atomic level, making every gram count. It's a beautiful system, all of us playing our part, living the most efficient lives we can, so that we can all live. What's not fair about that? What isn't fair, Doug, is selling resources for private gain. Profiteering is a serious crime.
Ooh, thank you. Yay! Clap, 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 everybody. That's a lovely story. That. And Neil's story finishes tidies up the book at the end, just beautifully. But tidying up the readings this evening, our last reader tonight is Claire Duffy, and she is a playwright and director of Civic Digits. Excuse me, of Civic Digits. Civic Digits recently made the Big Data Show, an interactive online performance about hacking and secrets. Claire wrote the CBeebies Christmas Show 2013 to 2019 and adapted A Midsummer's Night Dream for CBeebies. Didn't have that sort of thing when I was a kid watching television. We had Play School. Not fair. Claire also continues to make theatre with Unlimited Theatre, which she co-founded in 1997. Claire, can you tell us a little bit about your story and the scientists you collaborated with?
Sure, I collaborated with Dr. Leonardo Rios Solio, and he's a bioengineer programming bacteria, and I think he's focused on finding a bio cure for malaria. But at the dinner that everyone was talking about earlier, we ended up talking about the gut being this sort of second brain, basically, this other place of thinking because of microbes. So I headed off in that direction with my story. Shall I just go for it? Yeah. The second brain chain. Hello, my name is Dame Alison Bernard, Dame as of today. The press have been calling me Dame Doodoo, but I don't mind. I really don't. I'm used to the ignorance of the masses, the willful ignorance, I often think. It's just so much more fun not to care about the truth, isn't it? It's just so much easier not to bother considering quantifiable facts particularly significant. We're all going to die. That's what they think. That's one fact everyone does accept, death. We should have as much fun as possible while we're alive, right? I understand that point of view. You know what? I actually think it's a defensible one. We should have as much fun as we can while we're here. It's an amazing shot, life, an amazing shot. I appreciate it more than ever now, here at the end of my life. So what if people think my life's work is about shit? That really is much more fun than getting your head around the idea that I engineered bacteria to make molecules that make you a happier, different, better person. I don't care. I really don't. I'm Dame's second brain chain, with an outlet in every major city around the world and a private client list that includes everyone. I have nothing left to prove, and I'm here just to say thank you before the end. Actually, maybe death isn't that certain anymore, but I have to confess, I can't help laughing when people start explaining their plans for uploading their minds. It's so fashionable at the moment, all this whole brain emulation. I know how hypocritical I'm being. People used to laugh at me when I told them that changing the bacteria in their gut could cure their depression. My problem with the idea of an uploaded mind is that it wouldn't be connected to a gut. The gut is the second brain, but as my company's branding has it, second, not secondary. We're not able to think with the first brain without the second brain. So if you upload your mind only with the first brain, what will it know? Not much, in my opinion. But that's not what really makes me laugh about these nut jobs. What do they want to live? Why do they want to live forever? You don't want to read the same story forever, do you? What will be next? There may be another existence, and one without consciousness, very probably. What would it be like to be Earth? What would it be like to be a microbe? The unique contribution my work and my life has made to the 21st century has been at the intersection of the spiritual and the bacterial. Where do all human needs meet? In the gut, in the thinking, feeling belly. That's it.
Beautiful. Yeah. I like that story. The way to man's heart is through his stomach. Yeah. Or to his brain, I suppose.
Brain.
That's great. Well, thank you, Claire, for finishing off the stories there. Another element of the book, we just talked about briefly, which you haven't really covered, is actually the artwork in the book. It's been beautifully illustrated. Can anyone else do this? Not me. Elise, are you able to talk a little bit about the artwork for a minute or so? That'd be nice, about the artist.
Maybe Jen and Larissa might want to. Jen?
I'm just wondering if Pilar is Pilar here?
I don't think she is.
She's
Or
not
maybe
here. Okay.
under another name, maybe.
No, I can't see her.
Okay.
It's a shame.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
So how did Pilar? I think she got the stories after they were first before editing, basically, and just went on with her imagination, coming up with crazy.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a shame she's not here. It would have been nice to hear about the way she interpreted what she was reading into nice illustrations.
Some gorgeous work there. I love that kind of basic. Looks very simple, but a lot of work must go into thinking. Yes, the white on black was fantastic.
The white on black is nice too. Yeah. So we have a sort of section with the scientist's biography and a note on the science by the scientists, and and the writer's biography as well. But that uses some aspects of like Pilar's illustration as well, but kind of white on black. So that's after every story. So that was a really nice design element. I don't know if Marco, the designer, is here. Is Marco here?
I don't think so. Marco? Yeah. Sorry. Yes, there was a bit when it came to me as a publisher, it came as a complete package, so it was gorgeous to sort of have it presented in this way. And yeah, beautiful. Anyway, starting to come towards an end to this session. Are there any questions from our wonderful audience? Anyone want to come forward with a question? Just unleash your microphone and speak up. If not, I've got a couple.
Okay, or a comment.
Or a comment, yeah. You're all very shy this evening, unless you're watching the news. Okay, well, actually, a question I've got really is for Vivek, because we've heard a lot from the writers today, and I want to know, Vivek, if we've heard about Neil and his writer in his cupboard. How would you like a writer in your cupboard to help you with your science? Where would a writer come in useful for you when you're sitting there working away? At which point you think a writer here would be handy to help me do X or Y?
Are you asking like what I get from this project?
Yeah, essentially from having a writer on board.
So yeah, as I said previously, like basically I was interested in try to see if I can get inspired by the imaginations, right? So the thing that I feel about scientists is like we kind of like overloaded with information, and that's kind of preventing us from imagining new things and like connecting dots which are like totally unrelated. And that's where like the artists are able to do it very easily. Like they just connect totally relatable things and bring together things which have never been thought before. And I was trying to imagine like if that kind of thought process, if I'm exposed to that kind of thought process, can I get inspired by that and if I can use that in my work. So that was the main motive behind. And especially with Christie's stories, like a lot of these stories were like positive feedback between science and society, and like how the scientific findings remodel society very actively and dynamically, and how the society in turn provides the right atmosphere and like a conducive environment for the scientists to push the frontiers. So it's kind of like a play between society, and that kind of allowed me to think more like, is probably there is like a relationship between a scale at human interaction and what's happening in like molecular level and things like that.
Yeah, oh, fantastic. Yeah.
Can I add, and maybe other scientists would like to add to this as well. So we often have, so I know that in our center, we had a writer in residence for a while. And this goes two ways. So as Vivek explained, it helps us to connect dots, but also to portray our science to the public, and also to get the public and society in general to think about our science, and to get us as well to think about science. We know that we are playing, as Kirsty put it, we are playing with DNA, RNA, and it has potential to make our life so much better, but also to make our life really horrible. So it's really important for us to keep the link with the public, and this sort of collaboration for us is very important for this as well.
Yeah, excellent. We have got a couple of questions. Time's really marching on. Here's one from Lindsay May for the scientists. Again, a question to the scientists. I'm sorry, not the writers. There you go. For the scientists, how do you feel about the kind of freedom fiction writers have compared to scientific reporting and publishing? Any scientist on board able to answer that? How do you feel about the kind of freedom fiction writers have compared to scientific reporting and publishing? Oh, yep. Is someone coming? Hang on. I'm trying to unmute you. No. Anyone to answer that one?
We've got quite a few scientists here.
Yeah, I'm trying to shut up and let other scientists
I think
shall I say something? Oh, okay.
Hang on, we have one. Yes, please.
All right. So I may just volunteer, and I'm sure that maybe someone else maybe will give much better answer than mine. But I will volunteer and say this. Also, as a managing editor for one of the scientific journals with Elsevier, I can say that I suppose it's much easier for the writers of the science fiction to publish, because they are not restricted by the fact of the results and the experiments, and they can write whatever they feel that they want to write. There is no, in my opinion, there is no limit for their imagination and whatever they want to put. But for us, is really difficult. You need to have experiments and repeat the experiments, and the results that you want to publish has to be repeatable and trusted, and you'll get a lot of a challenge from peer reviewing and from editors and from everyone here and there for different criterias, novelty and logic and the way that you have done. So it is very difficult to publish in science. I think it is much easier to write science fiction, because you can just express yourself the way you want or the way you like.
So it's easier to write science fiction, people?
Not for me.
Just I think. For you to write science fact anyway. So, but those is it easier to write science fiction than science fact?
The greatest of respect. I don't think so.
I will agree with you on this.
Okay, one last question, just to redress the balance a wee bit. We'll finish off with this one. A question for writers. Did this project somehow change how you perceive scientists? Anyone want to pick that one up? Or I'll point. Who's... Gavin, do you want to pick up on that one? I don't know.
Probably not, because I've got a degree in computer science, so it didn't change. It didn't change the way I saw things.
Yeah, I'm just trying. I was trying to look through the faces there, and I'm trying to, because Pippa. Well, I wouldn't ask Pippa that question because she's also a hybrid monster of science and art. Neil as well. Claire, you've got your hand up. Excellent.
Yeah, I can. Well, I can say I'm not a scientist in any shape, way, or form. Definitely only a writer and theatre maker. But I have worked with quite a lot of scientists over the years, making work sort of inspired by the work, the research of scientists. But I did find this one a little bit more surprising in a way. I found that. Particularly, I worked a bit with Elise as well, and checking that I'd kind of had like the foundation of the idea was sound, and the way that she responded, and also the way that Leonardo responded to that was so sort of imaginative, really, and creative. I was really impressed with sort of how sort of creatively and energetically they engaged with this kind of what if. And it was also something that they kind of sort of had at the back of their minds a little bit already. So it seemed to me that they quite enjoyed going down the road of what if with me a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, just quickly from Pippa, I suppose, as a hybrid writer, scientist first, then a writer, did your brain change in that process?
No, I have to say, I mean, in response to what Abdel Rahman has just been saying, I actually think the processes are kind of quite similar in a way. If you want to create a plausible fiction, it's a bit like doing a thought experiment. You set up your kind of initial conditions, and then you sort of carry out this experiment in your head. And if you want to write good quality fiction, then you're actually kind of constrained by the way that you set up that experiment. At least that's how it feels to me. So in some ways, the two activities are kind of quite similar. I mean, you do have more latitude in fiction, definitely. And when I compare the non-fiction I write to the fiction, I definitely feel that if something's going wrong in fiction, if it's not going quite the way that you want, you can just sort of make things up. You can tweak your fictional universe. But yeah, I think there's quite a lot of similarities. Yeah, that's kind of partly what I enjoyed when I was talking to Karen Halliday about her work. Hi, Karen, I can see is that I enjoyed sort of exploring. I enjoy getting to know how creative her scientists in their lab were, and how much they talked about things that weren't necessarily science as part of their day-to-day work. So they brought other things that weren't science into the lab with them, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, okay, well, thanks very much, Pippa, for that. I think we better wrap up there. So just to remind you what it's all about, if my screen will show this, Biopolis, Tales of Urban Biology. If I go about there, that's fine. You can get it from our website, www.shorelineofinfinity.com, in both print and digital formats. And it should be out it is available in the bookshops now, or should be. If any bookshop wants to get in touch with Shoreline to pick it up, that's fine. I'm more than happy to do that. So that's the beast in question. And so thank you very much to all our contributors. So yay, claps for everybody. And particularly, of course, for the three editors who've lived with this, especially through COVID. Started in COVID, and then before COVID, and ended up in the middle of COVID. And I wonder what it would have been like if we'd have started this project now, mid-COVID. But anyway, so thank you all for coming. Thanks to all the participants. And to say, here at Shoreline Infinity, we've got a few events still to come this month, if you've got time. Next Thursday, we have a great one. We're launching Uncanny Bodies, edited by Pippa. So come back on next Thursday, the 12th of November. Tickets available on the website for a launch there. And I haven't got a copy of that here. Sorry, Pippa. Uncanny Bodies. It's upstairs by my bed. I'm reading it at bedtime. It's my bedtime reading, Uncanny Bodies. After that, the 19th of November, we've got a launch of a non-science fiction book, Umbrellas of Edinburgh, or relaunch. Edited by Claire Askew and Russell Jones. This was released a couple of years ago by Freight. Freight went down the tubes. And I'm delighted to be able to revive this. It's a fantastic collection of stories and poems about Edinburgh. That's being launched on the 19th, 2 weeks on Thursday. And on the 26th of November, our third and final event this year is at Event Horizon, where we're launching issue 19, which actually is invisible. It's not ready yet. It's in the process, so it'll go in there. And that's the science fiction magazine that we publish. And we're launching that on the 26th of November. We're also announcing the winners of our flash fiction competition as well. So 3 events next 3 Thursdays. So hunker down, people. Get on your Zooms, and we'll be here for you every Thursday for the next 3 weeks. So thank you again, everybody. It's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed this. Thanks for your time. And we'll
Thank you, Noel.
Yeah, a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's all wave goodbye to each other, shall we? Oh, there's Antonio.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.